Cool. So hello everyone. My name is Buchanan, as you can see, and today I'm going to be talking about timer mechanics and narrative in games. Now, as is the case with most conferences like this, many of you may probably actually know more about some of these things than me, and indeed more about the money side of things in some of these. What I'll be doing and where this talk is kind of aimed is at considering how kind of typical uses of time mechanics can often work, particularly in mobile titles, in microtransaction-driven titles, but also how they work in other titles and how time works in a concept in some games and how we can take lessons from some of those things to at least think about how we can do some mechanics differently elsewhere. So a little bit about me first. I'm a games writer, narrative designer. I've written games across indie, AAA, mobile, VR, and so on. One of the things I'm best known for is the big 30-hour No Man's Sky story update that changed a lot of story in the game, added about double the content that was there since release. I've worked for publishers, worked for THQ Nordic on Aquanox Steep Descent, it's an upcoming game. A popular Alexa game called The Vortex. Recent kind of one of my own titles called A Special Relationship, and a bunch of other titles from different studios that I won't bore you with a giant list of. In terms of my background, I have an academic background prior to going into games, so I did a PhD in identification and ethics in novel and video games. So a lot of it was looking at how characterization worked, how we build characters in our different media based upon our playing, reading experiences, looked at some films as well. And how causality and sequence and choice and control work as part of this process. I was also directing work such as for Divinity Original Sin 2, on these things. I will check my watch occasionally to check on time. Microtransaction-oriented time mechanics. Just briefly an overview of how I see key kinds of timer mechanics work in games that would link into microtransactions, and then we'll be contrasting these with other kinds of timer mechanics. So the basic way in which timers often work in games is they force delays in gameplay at intervals. So you have to stop playing, await completion of some kind of timer in order to get more gameplay. Either for the entire game or for particular parts of the game. One way in which this might typically work is tasks take X amount of time to complete. So for example, it will take an hour to build the building. Another way in which it might work is tasks might cost energy. So a task building the building might take 5 energy, and you'll get 1 extra energy every hour, maybe to a limit for that day or so on, entirely. Which is not entirely dissimilar to the first, it's just a different way of conceptualizing it. So for the first kind, and this is all probably very familiar to many of you, you may encourage the player to spend money to speed up time either directly or indirectly. So for example, you might pay to like half the amount of time it would take to build the building. You may, if it's like directly a timer mechanic, like an actual specific time elapse thing, such as in Fallout Shelter, Go, for example, has this in a kind of indirect way in that the egg timers for eggs hatching are based on distance traveled, which is equivalent to time, although it requires physical effort as well. But you can pay to, for example, have a super incubator, which will half the amount that distance will take. So one way or the other, it relies upon those systems. For the second system, you may, for example, spend money to buy energy reserves in advance of their automatic, often limited replenishment. So you might buy like bags of energy or so on in order to be able to mash through content very quickly. And these kind of two systems overlap in various ways, and a lot of games have an in-game currency which can sort of serve both functions. There is a third kind as well, rare, but where time durations cannot be shortened, but where in-app purchases will allow the utility of that time to be maximized somehow. So, for example, in Neko Atsume, you might, for example, be able to get better or different cats to come to your environment based on what you have bought with real money, but you're still going to wait for those cats to arrive. You're not going to suddenly have loads and loads of cats coming in, unless they did some update I don't know about, but the point would stand. About how that would all work. So let me check how we're doing. Cool. Microtransaction-oriented timer mechanics are often seen at best as a necessary evil by players. So they may not necessarily be seen as bad, but no one's going to be like, oh my god, I get to spend money on shortening a timer in a game. That's not going to be a massively exciting prospect. It might be an prospect, but it's not going to be like a positive, great thing. Which is not amazing. It may often be necessary, and it may even after this talk probably be necessary, but it's not necessarily an ideal state of affairs if it could be done other ways. You want people to feel happy about choosing to spend time with the game, indeed about spending money on that game. They want to feel like their experience is worthwhile rather than an annoyance to be mashed past. Some good news is that the timing mechanics are often used in games that do not involve microtransactions. And so part of the point is talking at those to kind of draw some general lessons about how time works in such games that we could then maybe apply back. Whether this talk will fully do so or not is an open question, but at least interesting ideas, hopefully. And if we draw lessons from such games and why the mechanism in these instances, you can better design equivalent mobile systems by drawing inspiration. Some of my examples are actually from mobile games as well as games on other platforms, but the point, for me, stands. Non-purchase mechanics. I didn't write some of these on the actual slides, but I did in my notebook afterwards to kind of make it clear for myself in a way that probably would have been helpful to be on the slides. This first kind of timer mechanic I would call the countdown. So the idea where you have a countdown to something occurring, or a time limit of something that can be done within X amount of time that increases pressure upon the player to do something. So for example, in the Walking Dead screenshot here, you have to make a choice, and often in Telltale games, you'd have to make a choice with some kind of expiration timer on you being able to choice, which is what I referred to on the left with time choices. These will typically force the player to make a gut decision very quickly on the course of action, either strategic or moral, that they would like to take, in a way which may get their gut truest reaction, actually, because they so quickly, but which they may be more likely to regret in that they didn't necessarily think through the options, or will feel like they regret anyway. But in a way that's fair, in that you feel like this is a simulation of real life and the way real life choices and interactions work, not some external force applied to the game. Whether time choices in this exact manner are necessarily suitable for mobile play sessions and so on is another matter, but the point stands about how those work, and we'll go into more detail on that later. The other kind, which is going to overlap with significantly, is where events will expire after a certain amount of time has passed. So you have a certain time window in which you can do something in a game, otherwise a certain outcome will occur or not occur for you, and then you won't be able to do it after that. For example, if you don't travel to the city within 20 minutes in the game, or within a certain amount of moves in a game, or whatever, a character will die, the city will fall, something will happen there unless you go there. And by going there, you've chosen not to do something else, and it takes time. It's a spend of game time what you're doing. This is often used in a narrative sense. They're often used in kind of not really narrative senses, the idea of missing out, and is indeed a very popular game system for some mobile games. So time-limited events are often frequently generate a feeling of missing out in mobile than already used. So Pokemon Go's Community Days, where certain Pokemon or shiny Pokemon is available in extra abundance on a particular time, and you've got to do it, otherwise you'll miss out. Often gets players playing all at the same time, which induces a feeling of community, hence Community Day. Hogwarts Mystery, certain events occurring at certain times where you get certain special items or outfits and so on, themed to a particular occasion. Or indeed Star Trek Timelines, which will have special gacha variants of the characters, or even narrative content, which helps the game feel like a living universe that you want to keep engaging in again and again, but it also makes a feeling that stuff is happening in a chronology. So even with low-impact narrative games, where there isn't a huge narrative like Pokemon Go, there is still a sense of something happening over time, which has been particularly accentuated with the quest system that's been introduced, or the idea of these big legendary Pokemon, or mythic Pokemon, and a mini-developing storyline there anyway. So this overlaps with the next sense. So this feeling that events are on the game without player intervention. Now, this is obviously not always true. In all cases, players are doing stuff. It may just be hidden behind the scenes what that is triggering time-wise. But this basic idea is that time can move on without you in a game and may leave you behind. So a very well example of this is Mystic Messenger. So in Mystic Messenger, you are sort of a teenage girl chatting to various online men in a kind of chat app over a real time. And if you don't engage in the game at certain times of day, you will miss out on conversations that will happen without you. And you can then spend in-app purchases to purchase access to those things you missed and go back to miss the missed content. It doesn't really matter, though, whether you do something like you missed out the content, but that was your call. You missed out on something that was happening in real time. It's part of the fictional world. It's part of the conceit of the game in a way that's very appealing and once again feels fair. It doesn't feel intrusive. And loads of other games have this anyway, triggered by player action, but not necessarily clearly so. So, for example, in games like This War of Mine, you basically will have things happening to your base and to your people, but in a non-kind of clear fashion. Bring it, so you might get attacked, you might get robbed, various things that might happen, but it's not clear why. So, the feeling that the world is in motion. Introduces a sense of time beyond the economic. And all of these points, which I'll be bringing it back to at the end as well, are the time should be, in a game that uses time as a microtransaction feature, you should, if you can, play upon time as a feature per se, as part of the setting, as part of the universe, if you can. Something about it that makes it feel like that is part of the stakes of the game, rather than something totally separate from your access to the game. It's part of proceedings, which is just generally good design. Other games will have such a thing as a day or night, weather, or seasonal cycle, where different times of day or different weather will prompt certain kinds of content to appear or not appear. Pokemon example, Eevee could evolve to an Espeon if evolved during the day, or an Umbreon if evolved at night. Different Pokemon may appear more frequently in certain biomes than others in the real world. And seasonal events may occur. And this is a big MMO staple, seasonal events like Christmas stuff, Halloween stuff. This embellishes other timed elements in a game to make waiting feel like an opportunity rather than a burden. So it makes time fun. So anything you can do to make time fun, if you're having key mechanics, especially if your game leveraging time, if you make time a fun concept, this is more likely to link everything together very nicely. Finally, and this is a bit more off the beaten track in terms of time mechanics, manipulation of event chronology. So this is a bit more to the side of the others and less kind of crucial. But games where you can actually reverse time or alter the chronology of events somehow. So this is a screenshot from Life is Strange, very popular PC and console title, which I think was ported as well, where you can go back in time choices after seeing their effects. So you do something, you can go back and do something different if you didn't like the outcome. Solve mistakes in an in-universe story-based fashion. Once again, this is fair in the context of the game. You're set up to expect the ability to do this. Unlimited your ability to do it. You can only do it in certain circumstances. But you leverage wanting to do something differently rather than waiting to do anything at all is the way that works. So some lessons draw from these mechanics, which once again slides a bit misleading there because it's just lessons for certain types of mechanics, because some of my examples were from mobile anyway. So first of all, I think some of this is about a sense of fairness. So in the first example, if timer or you made a bad choice as a result of a timer, it's your fault, and that's part of the dramatic experience. But it's part of the game. It's not like you've lost the game. It's part of the game that you will make mistakes. That's part of the experience. That's part of what you're there to engage in, and that feeling is meaningful. It's not an annoyance if designed well. It's not about making you anticipate the opportunity to do anything at all. It's about wanting to do better in the future and do better in the past if you can. Some of these things are also about narrative contextualization. So if you fail, it's part of the story and fits the rules of the story. It's not imposed by arbitrary, obvious external financial forces. The world feels real and has weight. Often free-to-play, and once again, many of you are probably more exposed to this than me, is often not very good at maintaining the magic of the experience, to put it mildly. It wears what it is on its sleeve to a very large degree in a way that maybe doesn't always have to, or that can be mitigated at least by other elements to help with that. Also, in terms of what this is and what time is and a way of conceiving of time is kind of one of the ultimate forms of augmented reality. In that it's something like a camera or complex in phone sensors. It's a clock. It's the real passage of time. Everyone understands time. In terms of why narrative is important to this, that's the basis of what narrative is and of what a lot of human thought is. Chronology, making sense of events. Thinking through the future, thinking through your present self is a big part of being human. And it's a thing that games are already trying to do, even accidentally, often in these circumstances, but which could be thematized or manipulated and exploited for various purposes. So generally what it's advocating for, in a kind of Greg's various random thoughts on this issue, is time being presented as a key part of the game experience, not as impediment to enjoyment. So not a time gate where you have to wait for an opportunity, but where time is fun or dramatic, because time is already those things in many ways. So yeah, that's pretty much the end, and just some thanks to some people who gave me some of the examples in the talk, which I had not heard of. And yeah, that's my talk on time. Engage.
I think that's really the key thing here is like, I love the way that you're looking back at how traditional uses of techniques that have been adopted by free-to-play, but not necessarily in the most effective ways, not in the ways that are about building engagement, but instead about creating friction. And I love that kind of juxtaposition. Does anyone have any questions for Greg? In which case, I'll ask one. So I think what I'm trying to do you think this kind of mindset is something you can apply to other elements of kind of free-to-play monetization, or do you think there's something special about kind of the way this timer model works, and how particularly it works in the narrative-based game?
I think it is. I mean, there probably are other elements that I just can't think of right now. but in terms of time and the nature of time, especially in relation to mobile games and free-to-play, is mobile play sessions are often short. They're often during the day. They're often intermittent. Partly what these mechanics leverage in the first place. The fact we'll have short waits for things, short extensions for things. We'll check in later in the day. So that's partly why they're not as much of an impediment as they might be. But I think that the fact that that's the way in which we're most likely to play those games means that the manipulation for especially narrative purposes could be played around with much more than it is, in that that's one of the main ways in which we're engaging with those games in the first place.
I think it's also, when we're sitting with the more traditional narrative-based games, I think what we do is we occupy a space. For example, if it's a console, we might be on the sofa in the living room, we've taken over the TV, the family's got to go spend time on their tablets or phones while we're dominating that screen. So, The Last of Us or sort of epic kind of experiences, we'll sit and play for 2, 6, longer sometimes if the family's gone to bed. But we spend time there. Whereas mobile, we're tending, I think, to be dip in, dip out, pause, and then come back to it. And so in some ways, I like the fact that you're using that fact that we're on the move and we are dipping in and out to make that make sense.
Sure.
So